그럼 지금부터 딜로이트에서 퀀텀 인포메이션 리드를 맡고 계신 메케나 맥그루 박사님께서 금융 분야의 퀀텀 점프, 혁신과 실용성의 융합을 통한 금융 서비스의 초기 가치 발견에 대해 강연해 주시겠습니다. 큰 박수로 맞이해 주시기 바랍니다.
Hi, thank you for the kind introduction. My name is Mekena McGrew, and I'm a quantum information lead at Deloitte. And prior to Deloitte, I was part of the quantum team at HSBC, trying to figure out how we use quantum technology in finance, and really focusing on how do we actually bring quantum solutions into production at an international bank. So as we're starting to see, there's been a lot of opportunities and challenges overcome by startups and academia and global banks to try and think about how we create commercially relevant quantum applications in finance. But there's actually a lot of challenges still to go between showing like a proof of concept in quantum to actually bringing a quantum application into production. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about those challenges, but don't just think of it as like adoption barriers, this is a no-go, because if you're an innovator, you realize that challenges are in fact opportunities to create and to innovate. And so I'm going to articulate a strategy that we started to develop at HSBC and that we're starting to further develop for enterprise clients and trying to deliver value in the enterprise through a quantum R&D program. Okay, so we're all here today because we see that quantum is going to radically impact financial services. We are able to potentially improve our risk models, create fair loans for clients in unstable times, and protect our clients from financial criminals in the market. And while we think about these types of applications for quantum computing, we realize that these applications are in fact high risk and high reward. So when we think about adopting this type of technology into the financial services industry, we need to ensure that risk and compliance and security are met to protect our clients and to protect the banks from the decisions that are made from these quantum algorithms. So one of the challenges that I see is that without commercially relevant quantum applications, we're not going to trigger all the processes that are going to be necessary to adopt this technology into the financial ecosystem. And so what I want to talk today a little bit is about a different strategy, and I think you've been hearing this word a little bit on these slides, which is the use of quantum-inspired technology. And I'll get into that a little bit more. And by including quantum-inspired into your quantum R&D program, you're able to start to bridge this gap, deliver early value from quantum R&D programs, and trigger the processes that will allow us to go through model risk and validation, enhance security, and make sure that all of our quantum applications are secure, and in the end, accelerate FSI adoption of quantum technology as the hardware itself begins to mature. So we're all here because, like I mentioned, quantum is set to disrupt the financial services industry. And when you're working in finance, you're dealing with really hard, really complex computational problems. And these hard, complex computational problems actually impact people, and the decisions that come out of them impact people, whether it be making clients more money or creating more trust within the banking ecosystem for clients. And so to kind of give a story of this impact and why when I think about quantum technology, I think about the people it affects, I would go back to my time at HSBC where I was working on the development of new fraud and anti-money laundering methodologies using quantum machine learning. And as we started to scale this out, as we started to deal with all the red tape associated with doing a proof of concept at a big bank that's going to actually demonstrate value, we started to see all these nuances that needed to be addressed. And so we went through all the work, and it takes a long time to be able to test these out in a meaningful way in a big ecosystem like HSBC. But the reward was so high because as we started seeing the value of quantum machine learning in fraud detection and money laundering, we started to actually see that we are catching criminals, catching people who are being victims of romance scams and investment scams and other types of transactional fraud. And this actually turned out to be a quantum-inspired technique that is impacting people and impacting the clients in the banking ecosystem. So I want to just kind of pause, because when we're looking at use cases of quantum computing in the financial services industry, a lot of times we'll have business units come to us and be in finance or be in any other industry, and they don't really know, how do I actually use quantum computing? And their data might be in a big mess and they have no mathematical model, and they're like, oh, quantum computing solves complex problems, right? Like, they think it's like a magic wand and I'm like a fairy who can just grant them their wish. But this is not, in fact, the case. Quantum computing is not a magic wand. There are certain types of applications that we know quantum computing will apply to in the realms of optimization, machine learning, Monte Carlo simulation, and financial modeling, as well as security. So Deloitte and Q-Control did a report and did a really extensive quantified use case analysis across the financial services industry, and it was able to rank the top use cases where they expect quantum will show value. And I encourage people to check out the QR code if you'd like to get into the report and a detailed analysis of the use cases. So before I dive into the challenges associated with quantum computing and quantum computing adoption in financial services, I wanted to take a step back and talk about the difference between quantum computing and quantum algorithms executed on quantum computers and what quantum-inspired computing is. So quantum computing uses the actual quantum physics of atoms, of like superconducting qubits, and they use these properties such as entanglement and superposition and measurement collapse to enhance the scale, the efficiency, and the security of these different applications. Quantum-inspired, on the other hand, is derived from methods that have been developed, well developed in the physics community for many years, known as tensor networks, which someone alluded to in the previous talk. And what this is it's able to emulate quantum physics on classical computers. So this is what physicists have been doing for years to understand the physics of our world. But what we're finding is that there's new applications for these tensor networks that relate to the financial services industry. And in fact, in some capacity, you can apply tensor networks to every single use case that I had mentioned on the last slide. And so what's interesting is we actually can use classical hardware, right, reliably. We have control over the error from our algorithms, and we're able to actually get the algorithm into areas where highly restricted data sits. So I'm already able to bring the algorithm on-prem into, let's say, where we're doing trading and I want to do some Monte Carlo analysis, or in the cloud where I'm trying to process transactions at volume, and I'm able to scale it out. And I want to describe the importance between the two, and that in fact, a lot of researchers in the quantum community view tensor networks and quantum-inspired as the adversary of quantum computing. But what I want to articulate, it's not an adversary, but a necessary stepping stone to be able to accelerate the adoption of quantum models within the financial services sector, rather than getting the shock that one will see if we have a quantum use case on quantum hardware go beyond what we can do in classical. You can imagine like the shock of Gen AI, the shock of a quantum computing application, if it showed up tomorrow and like JP Morgan released this awesome paper and they've solved derivative pricing on a quantum computer, it's going to take years and years before we start seeing that adopted into the financial services industry. So that's what I want to talk a little bit about today. I want to get into the adoption challenges that I saw at HSBC and how we can use quantum-inspired to be able to address these challenges now and create strategic frameworks and get things in place so that we can further adopt quantum technology in the future. So for those, I don't know how many here are actually in the financial services industry and working on Gen AI, but if you're working on Gen AI and FS, risk and governance is probably either your favorite topic or your least favorite topic, because it's really what's standing in the way of like full enterprise scale Gen AI execution within the financial services industry. And so if we think about it, like banks are subject to their regulators, and the decisions that come out of the models within a bank are highly scrutinized and validated so that you can go back to a regulator and say, my model made this decision and this is why. So if we think about, let's say, a variational quantum algorithm that we employed that affected the bank's overall liquidity, how are we going to go back to a regulator and explain the outcome of this variational quantum algorithm? I would say there's actually not a lot put into place to be able to actually validate that outcome, let alone regulators and model validators who understand the nuances of quantum algorithms so that they can, translate between the data scientists and the business analytics and how this algorithm is affecting the overall bank. So I think it's going to take a long time to develop. And what I want to kind of talk about with quantum inspired, as we think about these quantum inspired models, we're actually starting to address these challenges because they are delivering value, because they can be used in production. We're triggering these processes earlier, able to have those conversations with model validators and create frameworks that we can, explain the outcomes of our models to regulators. The other thing I want to talk about is secure architectures. And you think about the transition, right? We used to have on-prem mainframes that did all of our computer processing, and we trusted our computer architectures because they were on-prem, secure, within our own ecosystem. And then over the last decade and a half, we've been transitioning to cloud and cloud infrastructure. And you see that the cloud providers are bearing a lot of the security risk associated with their compute architectures. This is actually also relevant when we think about upgrading and transforming to the new NIST standardization of post-quantum. Cloud providers are bearing a lot of that risk. And so if you're familiar with quantum computing, you know that we're not really going to have quantum computers on-prem. It's a white glove service. It costs a lot of money. And so quantum computers are going to be accessed through the cloud, a classical network, right? If we think about the security protocols that are out there for quantum, they make the assumption that everyone has their own individual quantum computer connected by a quantum network. This does not exist, and this isn't going to exist for probably quite some time. So one of the questions that has been bothering me for a really long time is, okay, I am, some user at a bank, and I'm going to connect to a quantum computer through a classical cloud, be it Amazon or Google or whomever. And how do I know? How do I verify that I am in fact talking to a quantum computer and not some adversary's quantum simulator that's giving me bad results or maybe even encoding malware on those results? So JP Morgan's certified randomness experiment was actually, and it's a subtlety that I don't think was talked about very much, was the first verification of a quantum cloud connection, where they trusted through that they were connected to Quantinuum's actual quantum computer through this certifier. And if you think about it, I think you guys may have noticed 1 million GPU hours, right? Just to certify that in fact they were talking to a quantum computer. So if I were to go to my cybersecurity team and I wanted to bring a quantum computer into production, how am I going to validate that my quantum computer is not getting hacked? Most of the time when people think about quantum security, their mind immediately goes to protecting our classical algorithms or our classical computers from quantum computers, right? Worried about Shores, upgrading and migrating to PQC. But what about our quantum computers getting hacked? There's in fact a host of new attack vectors that are introduced in the quantum computing ecosystem, and there's this paper here that's like a review on what a few of them are, including things like crosstalk attacks, compilation attacks, because we have to compile quantum circuits, and sometimes the most efficient quantum circuit is a black box optimization. What if malware was being introduced in this compilation process? How do we know? How do we verify? There's no quantum antivirus out there. Right? So how are we going to talk to our security team of onboarding a quantum computer that's going to host highly restricted data and encode it into variational parameters, for instance, or some other means? We don't really know, right? So as I mentioned, these are challenges, these are things to think about, these are things I think about, and I think it's also opportunities for the quantum ecosystem to start innovating in this space and thinking about it more seriously if we want to bring quantum computing into production. So taking a step back, right, because my pitch is that quantum inspired helps mitigate these risks. A quantum inspired algorithm works on classical architecture, right? So I can use my classical computers, be it on-prem or in the cloud, and I can rely on the classical security protocols that are already in place through this cloud connection. So it mitigates this risk entirely. And so I am just touching like broad stroke, right? The tip of the iceberg of production challenges we're going to face in quantum computing. But one more thing to think about. With all of these issues, who is going to do all of this work, right? We know that there is a massive talent gap in the quantum computing space, with only a few experts at big banks and large enterprises and actually across the world who really understand how these models work, who really understand how quantum computers work. And it's going to be really hard to start triggering transformation processes to adopt this technology when there's very few experts who actually know what's going on. And what I have found over time is that, in fact, unless a technology is going to directly improve an employee's skill set and make them more efficient at their jobs or make them more competitive over their peers, they're probably not going to put in the work to understand this new technology unless it's actually delivering commercial value, right? So if we wait and keep waiting until like we see a quantum advantage that's delivering commercial value, we're going to still have this massive talent gap. But by working on quantum-inspired models, again, since they deliver value, you start to see more of an uptick in people actually wanting to learn how they work, wanting to learn how quantum circuits work, wanting to think about the models in a more rigorous way, and being willing to help going through the model validation process. So by working with quantum-inspired, you're able to mitigate all of these risks that I mentioned before. And so this is kind of the kicker that I think we're all kind of here wondering today is, will quantum computing hardware deliver near-term return on investment with a cost-benefit outcome? So we're starting to see commercial applications, but at an extremely high cost. If you think H100s are expensive, try running a quantum computer for an hour, and you'll see how expensive it can become. Because there's just not a lot of them yet. We're still trying to understand how to scale this technology and how to reach that economy of scale. So as we're working towards that, we need to have quantum R&D programs that are actually delivering value to substantiate the work we do and to keep this going. So quantum inspired does deliver a return on investment with a cost-benefit outcome and will prepare the organization for the mature quantum hardware. So if you're thinking about, if you're in here, some are already quantum experts working in quantum startups, and you got what you guys are doing. But if you're in a large enterprise and you're thinking about, or you're just here because you're curious, how can I actually think about using quantum technology within my organization? Our strategy is to start with a quantum inspired approach, to think about how these quantum inspired algorithms can be used in different use cases, and start to lay out the overall framework to begin to slowly adopt quantum technology as it continues to mature over time. So to summarize, as I mentioned, and as we're going to see here today, quantum computing is going to impact financial services in a pretty big way because it touches the core of the business. It touches the money, it touches the client's data. And when you have that, you're going to have a lot of value generated from these types of use cases. There are challenges in the way related to risk and governance, security, and talent gaps across the organization. But by using quantum-inspired approaches first, you're able to address all of these challenges rather immediately and deliver value from your quantum R&D programs. So just to talk a little bit about what we do at Deloitte, we work on quantum readiness. We help enterprises develop quantum strategies and roadmaps to create quantum R&D and quantum innovation programs. And then we also work on quantum implementations to think about how to develop use cases and build business cases around the value that we start to see come out of quantum technology, along with doing fundamental research in quantum applications. Thank you.
메케나 맥그루 박사님 강연 잘 들었습니다. 지금부터 질의응답 시간을 갖도록 하겠습니다. 질문 있으신 분들은 자리에서 손을 들고 계시면 마이크를 전달해 드리도록 하겠습니다. 문재인 대표님.
Hi, thanks for the talk. So you probably have a few clients already, and I'm interested in knowing more about which industry is currently most fast in adopting quantum technology.
I wouldn't say any of them are fast. When you're working with large enterprises, I will say the industries that we are seeing more interest in, like exploring quantum, is financial services, insurance companies, which I guess falls into financial services, and life sciences and healthcare. And we're just starting to see a little bit of interest in the consumer industry.
Well, Korea is heavily a manufacturing country, and if manufacturing companies is looking into a quantum technology, what should it be looking at?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to give a guess that like supply chain is probably the most important when you're dealing with manufacturing and supply chain logistics. And so the most obvious use case would be to explore optimization algorithms and quantum optimization algorithms to speed up or get better answers when it comes to kind of orchestrating your supply chain for manufacturing or dealing with supply chain risk.
Thank you.
Hi, Mekena. Thanks for the holistic sort of forecast of quantum computation into financial sectors. I have a related casual business question, as I think many of the people who are here will be interested. Given Deloitte's emphasis on both workforce transformation and technical proofs of concept, what balance, either quantitatively or qualitatively, should firms strike between upskilling existing staff versus hiring external quantum specialists as they prepare for quantum adoption?
Yeah, really great question. So it is important to hire some, like a core quantum team, right? Who understands the vendors and understands the technology and can help kind of navigate use case development and dealing with trustworthy vendors. And I kind of see it, the way we've been thinking about it is like different personas of who we would want to educate and what they actually need to learn. So your core quantum team is probably going to be composed of technical experts who should have a very, very strong understanding of quantum up and down the technology stack. And also the business side. We can't just think of quantum teams as being purely technical all the time, as technical people tend to do. You also have business people, and these business people need to be able to understand what is and what is not quantum, right? They need to understand the policies that are happening around the world and dealing with like export control and things that are happening in that space. And so there's actually not a lot of coursework that's available for like the business persona. It's mostly around like actually learning quantum technology itself. And then I think you're going to see maybe on the outside of that, it's going to be, I'm going to work on a few use cases with different business units. And what can happen, which is unfortunate, is the quantum team bears the full responsibility of executing those types of use cases. And what really needs to happen is that transition of getting the business units to be more independent, to be able to run this technology and understand this technology. And so like some low level kind of beginning education, I think there's some products out there that are good for that. that we're starting to recommend to clients to start upskilling data scientists so they understand how to run these models. Being able to like talk to senior managers and begin to educate senior managers who are making decisions on the outcomes of like how you actually move this model into production. So I would say it's like a nice balance. Like I do think you need to have a core team that you have hired probably externally because the talent likely doesn't already exist in your organization. And then kind of slowly based on use case development and actually application to the different business units, you begin to educate, right? So it's kind of like a network, right, that begins to expand over time.
Thank you. Thank you for the insight. Thank you.
Hi, Mekena. Great. Thanks for the great talk. And just follow on the line of workforce and actually the scarcity of experts that kind of know how to do quantum computing. Is that like the emerging trend, or I would say among consulting firms like Deloitte that can work with the enterprise to essentially become the external expert group to basically help them essentially chart the way forward to adopt quantum computing and its applications. Right? Is that the trend right now?
That is absolutely the trend. It's big consulting firms and quantum startups too. So starting to see like a lot of quantum startups, in fact, are beginning to offer like quantum strategy and roadmaps. You also have big tech trying to do the roles of consulting as well and educating with quantum strategy and roadmaps. So I would say that's a large trend across all different participants in the quantum business ecosystem.
I think that's actually, but along the line of consulting and offering expert advice to the enterprise, is it like true that the consulting services like Deloitte and other companies are better suited towards advising across the world, across the industries? Because if you talk to IBM, for example, they do consulting at a cost, but actually there's a strong conflict of interest because they always try to gravitate the whole enterprise towards their own services, which is can be viewed as like a conflict of interest, but Deloitte seems to be more, and other companies seem to be more neutral in other kinds.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's kind of what you see. Like there's a lot of biased consulting out there to drive clients towards their products rather than like a holistic view and understanding what the business needs actually are and what products or what services are going to best be suited to meet those needs and how you can actually leverage them and go through the transformation process, drawing kind of on the breadth of Deloitte's experience and digital transformation across all sorts of emerging technologies that we all take for granted today.
I see. Thanks. Yeah, I was trying to understand like the emerging role of like consulting firms in the quantum application landscape, because in the old days, like 5 years ago, more than that, it's pretty much all quantum tech experts, like IBM and other companies in the field doing this market education. But now I think it's great to have those consulting companies to be the proper platform for that.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks.
Thank you.
네, 혁신과 실용성의 융합을 통한 금융 서비스의 초기 가치 발견에 대한 인사이트를 공유해 주신 맥케나 맥그루 박사님께 큰 박수 부탁드립니다.